Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into one of the most mysterious, most debated books in history to see if its famous apocalyptic visions might actually be hiding a completely different story. So get this, we're looking at a pretty wild theory from author Noel Robertson Platt, and it asks a simple question. What if the book of Revelation isn't actually about the end of the world? What if it's a coded message about the past, a defense of history hidden in plain sight? You know, for literally centuries, the book of Revelation has both fascinated and, let's be honest, terrified people. We think of it as this roadmap to the end times, right? Well, according to this one author, we might have been reading that map completely upside down. All right, so where do we even begin with this? Well, Platt's whole investigation kicks off with a really simple but kind of powerful observation. The book of Revelation, it seems to constantly contradict itself. And he argues these aren't mistakes. Nope, they're intentional clues. So Platt lays out a bunch of these inconsistencies that he sees as clues. For instance, the text talks about 7 spirits of God. But wait a minute. Doesn't that kind of clash with the whole idea of a single Holy Spirit? And then there's the promise that these events will happen shortly. Well, here we are 2,000 years later. Platt's point is these aren't just little quirks. He thinks they're deliberate signals, a way of telling us, hey, what you're reading on the surface, it's not literal. It's a carefully constructed illusion. Okay, so if the book is an illusion, then what's the real story? What's behind the curtain? Well, Platt says there's a key. A hermeneutical key, as he calls it, hidden right inside the text that unlocks the whole thing. And this is it. The key, according to Platt, is found in this one single powerful line from Revelation 19:10. Seriously, the entire theory hinges on how you read the sentence. So traditionally, when people read the testimony of Jesus, they think it means prophecies about what Jesus is going to do in the future. But Platt just flips that idea completely on its head. He says, no, it means the apostles' eyewitness testimony, what they actually saw and heard and touched when Jesus was alive in the flesh. And just like that, the prophecy isn't about the future anymore. It's about the past. Specifically, it's about the Easter story. But that brings up a massive question, right? I mean, why? Why hide this message in such a ridiculously complex allegorical code? Well, Platt claims the motive is tied to a really dangerous idea that was spreading like wildfire in the early church. And that idea was called Docetism. Basically, it was this belief that Jesus was just a spirit who only seemed to be human. Now, you can see why this was a huge threat. I mean, if Jesus didn't have a real physical body, then he couldn't have really suffered or died for humanity's sins. It completely guts the core of the Christian faith. And this is where it gets really interesting. Here's the incredible irony that Platt points out. To fight back against this heresy, this fiction that Jesus' life was just an illusion, the author of Revelation creates his own illusion, a super complex allegory. Why? To prove the absolute, undeniable reality of that life. It's this brilliant move of fighting fire with fire. Okay, so this brings us to the climax of the whole theory. If Revelation is really a coded Easter story, where's the proof? Where's the smoking gun? Well, Platt argues that you can literally map its crazy visions directly onto the events of Christ's final days. Now, the key to unlocking this map is a theological concept known as the sin-imputed Christ. The idea in Christianity is that on the cross, Jesus basically took on all the sins of the world. So Platt's argument is that we should see him as a kind of substitute for the evil figures in Revelation. So for example, when the book talks about judgment falling on this wicked city called Babylon, it's actually an allegory for the judgment that fell on Christ himself. And this right here is what the author calls the smoking gun. Check this out. The bowls of wrath in chapter 16, that's an allegory for Christ's passion. The total destruction of Babylon in chapter 17, that symbolizes his death. Then you get Babylon's funeral dirge in chapter 18, which maps perfectly to his burial. And finally, the first resurrection in chapter 20 lines up with his resurrection. It's all there, a clear passion, death, burial, and resurrection sequence, hidden right in the middle of the apocalypse. Wow. So what does this all mean? Well, the main takeaway here is that this theory completely transforms our understanding of the apocalypse. I mean, it is a seismic shift in perspective. Suddenly, the book isn't some terrifying prophecy about the end of the world anymore. Instead, it becomes this incredibly brilliant, allegorical defense of the single most foundational event in Christian history.
And it was all written to solve a very specific, real-world problem happening back in the 1st century.
And that leaves us with a pretty provocative thought, doesn't it? If this theory is on the right track, it suggests that the real key to understanding these ancient texts isn't just in their words, but in the historical context and the specific problems their authors were trying to solve. So you have to wonder, what other hidden meanings might be out there, just waiting for us right beneath the surface?